Right, so today we're going to be removing the gearbox sprocket from the back of the gearbox. Before we do that, a couple of issues from the previous video, mainly a lot of rubbish from me really. In the previous video I said that there were different size gearbox sprockets that were changed according to whether it was the American market or the UK market or whatever, to reduce the gearing for the American market, and that's absolute rubbish basically. They only ever made one gearbox sprocket, and that's 18 tooth. What I was doing, I was getting mixed up between this gearbox sprocket, the Triumph Trident sprocket, and my Commando engine. Now the Commando, they definitely use different size gearbox sprockets depending on the market, but for the Trident the gearbox sprocket remained the same. They did change the size of the rear sprocket on the back wheel. Now I'm not 100% sure whether all American models had a different rear sprocket, a bigger sprocket. I think it's 23 tooth or something, I can't remember them. Oh, I should have checked before I came on, but anyway, there are two different sizes of rear sprocket on a Trident, and that's what is changed to reduce the gearing, change the gearing. This the gearbox sprocket is standard on all models. Okay, number one. Number two, we need to remove this key. This is the key that holds the clutch hub onto the main gearbox main shaft, and we'll be checking it later on. The actual clutch hub, we need to check that this key isn't damaged, the keyway in the hub isn't damaged, and the teeth or splines on the clutch hub aren't damaged, because they can wear, and when they do start to wear, either the keyway or the actual splines, then wear can accelerate very rapidly. So it's very important to check that that clutch hub is okay. Right, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to tap out the Woodruff key, just using a small drift, just getting under that front edge and lifting it so I can pull it out. Then I'm going to tap off the locking. Is locked in on two sides, this the nut for the gearbox sprocket. Then I'm going to lock the gearbox sprocket. Now this is very difficult, I always find, because there is no special tool for locking the gearbox sprocket. Now when I very first did this, I used the time-honoured method of getting an old chain, putting it around the sprocket, and then like bunching the chain up on the engine so like it locked on the engine. But unfortunately someone had used the highest strength locking sort of fluid. I still to this day do not know what it was, but it was like concrete. Anyway, it was so tight that when I tried to undo this nut, that the chain actually dug in to the crankcase and damaged and actually cracked this bit of the crankcase where the oil pressure release valve goes into, because you know that nut, it wasn't, the nut wasn't tight, it was just that it was cemented on with, I really don't know what they used on that engine, but anyway. So I've sort of created my own little method now, and what I do is I get a chain and I lock it in a vise on the bench, and then that locks the sprocket, and then you should be able to undo the nut. I've also bought, over the years, I've bought a large socket that's big enough and deep enough, most importantly, to fit on that nut, because you can get a socket to fit on that nut, but it's normally not deep enough. It won't clear the end of the main shaft. So I have managed to get one, so I can now use my I can get a socket on that and use the power extractor tool. Yeah, it won't come to me. The name of it won't come to me. What are they called? Ratchet thing. Yeah, that one. Anyway, we're going to use that to undo the nut. So I'm going to go off camera. I'm going to probably just dig out that Woodruff key so we don't lose it, and then I'm going to set up the vise and the chain and so on, bend the locking tab back, and then we'll get ready to remove that nut so we can get the gearbox sprocket off. Although actually what we're going to do is we're going to loosen the gearbox sprocket. We're not actually going to take it off completely, and I'll explain why a bit later on. Okay, so I've removed the woodruff key from the gearbox shaft so I don't get it lost. I've taken the I've undone the lock tabs on the lock washer, and I've put an old chain in the vise, and I've drawn the engine up so it's like jammed against the vise. And so now I've got the Mega Blaster, which is my cordless impact driver. I've remembered the words now, with this huge socket that on the end, and I think it's in 3 pieces, this socket. Cost a load of money, but worth it, because I can actually get onto that now. Famous last words, there we go. And then I'm going to use the impact driver and we should be able to spin that nut off without any problems. Famous last word, here we go. There it goes. There, it's off. Okay. Right. Great stuff. So that's the method I use. Lock the chain in the vise. Now, I don't know if you can see this. I'll have to tilt the camera a bit. Make a right mess of things. Right. So I don't actually have a vise on my bench because my bench is pretty small, and I used to have a vise bolted to the bench, but it was great, but it was in the way all the time. So what I do now is I've just got a vise which isn't bolted, and I use these grips, these what are they called, the quick grips, and they're fantastic. They're amazingly strong, and I just actually grip the vise to the bench so I can use the vise when I need it, and then get it out of the way again and when I don't, because I haven't got much room. Anyway, we've got the that nut off now, but I'm not going to remove the sprocket, or I might remove the sprocket, but I'm going to put it back on again, because I'm going to need to lock this again, because on the other end of the gearbox main shaft, when we get the other end of the gearbox off, there's a nut on that end of the main shaft that we need to undo, and the only way of doing that is to lock the main shaft again, and the only way of doing that again is to use the same method by putting the chain on this sprocket. So I'm going to leave that sprocket on. The only thing I'm going to need to do is, obviously the bike's in neutral at the moment, so we'll have to get it into gear, otherwise the main shaft will just turn, and then lock this as it is before when we get that side off, so I can undo the nut on that end of the main shaft. Okay, but that's off for now. But I'll probably yeah, that's the, I'll get the oh blimey, I'll just get this off now, and of course it won't come off. The lock tab. Okay, well I'm not going to do it on camera. I'm just going to take this off and have a look. But I'll put the no, I'll do it now. Let's have a look. See what we can see and what we can't see. So I haven't got my gloves on, but never mind. Because of course I'm going to put a brand new lock washer on. Would never reuse a lock washer, even though in this case you could reuse it because you can bend up different bits of it, but it just doesn't, it's just not worth it. I really wanted to check that there was an oil seal under here, and it would appear that there is a little circular O-ring oil seal. Let's have a look, see if I can encourage it to come out. There it is. Okay, now that is a very important seal, and I was just checking it was there. It just sits right at the back there, right in behind that locking washer, and that's very important, because what can happen is oil in the gearbox comes down these in between the splines of this main shaft bearing, and that's how it gets through. It doesn't get through there. it comes actually down the outside of this main gear bearing and gets and then leaks out onto the ground, because this is obviously the outside before the clutch. So it's very important to have this little circuit seal, and in this case it was in position. Well, again, when we come to put things back together, we'll go through that, but a very important little thing that some people don't know about, and then they get little drips of oil down the back of the gearbox and not sure why. Okay. Okay, so now we've undone the nut holding the gearbox sprocket on. We're going to remove the outer cover of the gearbox. That'll enable us to get to that nut on the end of the main shaft that we need to loosen by locking the gearbox sprocket again. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to drain the oil from the gearbox. So underneath the gearbox we've got basically three nuts. We've got this very long, strange looking hex one. We've got a big hex there, and inside the big hex is a small hex. So this big long one, is the reason it's big and long is that there's a spring-loaded plunger inside it, and that plunger pushes up against the cam plate inside the gearbox, and that locks the gears. And as the cam plate turns, there's a notch, and this plunger in here locks into the notch, so each time you change the gear it rolls around and then locks. So that's why that's a big long nut, because inside it is a spring-loaded plunger. Then this big nut is the drain bolt for the gearbox, and then inside that this little nut is the level gauge for the gearbox, because of course if you look at it there's no dipstick or anything in the gearbox, so how high do you fill the gearbox? You can there is that's how you undo that, and you can pour the oil in, but how much? Well, on these older bikes, instead of a dipstick or whatever, so we'll see in a minute, but on the end of this there's a long tube on the attached to the end of this little nut, and that tube sits up inside the gearbox, so about there, a hollow tube, and basically you would undo the little nut, okay, and then fill the gearbox full of oil, and then sorry, that tube is attached to the big nut, so the tube would sit there, hollow tube, and then when the gearbox got to the top tube, obviously it would start dribbling down the tube, so you'd know that's your level, and then you could put that little nut back on, and that seals to stop the oil coming down the tube. We'll see that in a minute, because I'm going to be undoing this nut, which is the drain plug. We'll get the oil out and you'll see the little tube I'm talking about, which is used for the level on a T150. There is actually a dipstick on a T160, but on the earlier models that's what you use to work out the level of oil in the gearbox. So I'm going to remove that nut and drain the oil. Okay, I'm going to do this handheld because it's a bit easier, famous last words. So I've just loosened that drain plug, so I'm now going to remove the drain plug completely and hopefully catch the oil in my little tray. Just good, and there you can see that's the little tube. When you take that nut out, then that opens the tube, so that tube sits up inside the gearbox, see? So when you fill the oil, when it gets to the top of the tube, it dribbles down. That's when you know the level's correct, and then you put the little nut back on. But obviously for draining the oil, we'll take the whole thing out. Okay, and that's looking nice. That's looking like nice normal gearbox oil. It looks like it's been fairly recently changed. The advantage, well, not the advantage, you normally find that gearbox oil tends to look okay, because it doesn't get as hot and burn as the engine oil. So it does tend to last a lot longer, but this looks pretty good oil anyway, so I'm guessing it's been changed fairly recently. Woo! So I just realised I need to change the angle on the tray before it overflows somehow. Yeah, got it. Okay, I'll leave that to drain a bit, and then we'll be taking the outer cover off. So we've got the Allen screws, and then we've got a flat blade screw, a long screw, and then we've got these two 1/2 inch studs. So there's a nut on the end of each stud, and then we'll be ready to remove the outer gearbox cover. Now I'll just mention, and down here, by the way, that's the oil filter, which we'll take off later on. One thing is, I don't know if it's worth doing. It's much easier to take the gearbox outer cover off with the Kickstart lever in position, because that should come off, but this with the outer cover, and so does the Kickstart shaft, that comes off with the outer cover. So if you actually have the Kickstart lever in position, A, you can use that to pull the cover off, B, you can hold it so that the spring on the Kickstart doesn't suddenly release and shoot round, and C, you can actually use the Kickstart to actually release the cover, because by amazing cleverness, if you push the Kickstart down, it actually has a sideways force, and by moving the Kickstart down, it actually serves to push the cover away. So I'll see how we go. I was thinking I might take the Kickstart lever off my T150 and put it on there, just to make life easier for us. I'll see how we go. But that's what I normally do: leave the Kickstart on, then A, you can pull it, B, you can stop the spring going mad, and C, it actually serves to push the cover off by magic, just by moving, kicking it over a few times. It does actually push the cover off. Right, anyway, I'll get ready to take, I'll get the various tools needed to undo these screws. Right, I'm getting ready to remove the outer gearbox cover. I want to do that now so that we can remove the nut off the end of the gearbox main shaft by locking the sprocket again with the vise in the rear chain. So I'm removing these 1/2 inch nuts off the studs. It's been there a while. Couple of washers on it, interesting. Oh, you don't want to come out now. Come on. There we go. That's cool. Two washers on this one as well. Yeah, unnecessary, but there we go. Right, then what we got then? We've got a long screw there with a slot headed screw. You can get that one out. Yeah, come straight out. That's a long one, it goes right through the inner gearbox casing into the crankcase. And then we're going to remove all the Allen screws from around the edge. Okay, is that more? I think that's everything. Then we're going to try taking the outer gearbox cover off. And so what I'm going to do is, I haven't got the Kickstart lever, so I'm going to try initially, probably fail miserably. I'm going to try putting a pair of moles on there, mini moles. I can feel it, didn't want to know at all. I'm seeing if that'll use my famous method of kicking over, but I don't want to know. I've got a feeling it needs to be in gear. Don't ask me why. And of course it's in neutral. and I had planned to put it in gear when I've got the when I've got this cover off. So, because of course I haven't got a gear lever on. I think this is going to fail pretty miserably. The cover don't want to come off. And the moulds don't want to stay on. I'll try doing the old blowtorch around the seal, as I've said before, but I've got a feeling I'm going to have to put a gear lever on that. I'll get the blowtorch. Right, so I'm going to heat up the, whoa, get that out of the way, don't need to leak. We want to heat that up. So the idea is this will liquefy, loosen any gasket sealant. Also, of course, on this you've got these two studs, and it does seal around those studs. You know, it sticks on those studs. So I'll try this. I'm not over optimistic. I think I'm going to have to bite the bullet, take the kickstart lever off my T150, put it on there, possibly take the gear lever off the T150, put it on there, put it in gear. Try kicking it over again, see if that will shift. If it doesn't, then at least I've got the gear lever to give it a good old wangle about. Sorry, kickstart lever. Gas, I think. Well, I'll give it another go, but I have to say I'm not that optimistic. This sort of mini mold doesn't want to stay on there for a start. I don't think there's any sign of it going at all. No, that seems to be well on there. The last one, the mighty Thor. I think that's just going to knock the mould grips off. Is there some movement now? Oh, I think there was movement there. Yes, we've got oil. Oh, mighty Thor comes to the rescue. You've actually definitely got movement off the opening. Even though we've drained the oil, of course, we've still got oil because there's like a flange in there, webbing, and so the oil sits in there, can't actually get to the drain plug. So there's always oil in the outer casing. Right, let's see if it's showing any more inclination to come off by hand. Thinking about it, but that's about it. Put some WD-40 on these studs because they're definitely not wanting to move. Go back to the mighty Thor. Okay, I think we've got separation now. Let's see. So I'm going to try and use the moles, they'll stay on, to hold the Kickstart spring so it doesn't go mad when we take the cover off. Here we go. Yeah, I can feel it's gone. It's gone. And there we go. I can just gently release the spring. Out it going bonkers. It's very clean. Yeah, very clean in there. My word, it's a very clean gearbox. Yeah. Look at that. Looks like brand new in there. I was expecting it to be a bit rusty because normally the gearbox all just sits in there if the bike's been in storage for ages, and of course the top half isn't in oil and it rusts, but that looks very very good. Okay, catch the rest of that oil. Yuck. Normal crud in the bottom, but you're always going to get that. Trying to stop the bench getting too manky. Right, so this is the nut on the end of the main shaft that we need to get off now. And so what we're going to do is, there's a couple of, there's a lock tab on there with 2 ears. We need to take the lock tab off. We'll put the bike in gear. I don't know if I can do that. Let's have a look. There we go. Put that into first, I think. Yeah, so the sprocket is now locking on the gearbox main shaft. So I'm going to take those 2 tab washers off, 2 ears, get a socket on that, get the impact driver on, lock the sprocket, and hopefully we'll be able to get that get this nut off. And that's the last of the really difficult, well, nearly the last. There's the two cam the nuts on the end of the camshafts have got to come off the cam pinions. So that's the last of the nuts that are difficult to undo. We have to lock the engine for those, but this is really the last of the difficult ones generally. Okay, so I'll go off camera, I'll get everything ready, I'll knock those back, and then we'll see if we can undo this nut. Thank you to the mighty Thor. Hoorah! Okay, so let's hope this works, because of course I've been lazy again. I've now clamped the vice to the bench with the chain around the gearbox sprocket again, taking the tabs off this nut, and we're going to use the impact driver with a 15th 16th socket on to remove that nut. However, because the sprocket is now on the back, it's difficult to get the vice in the right position, because obviously the sprocket's over there. I really want it to be over here, but I can't. If I have the engine around that way, I can't get to this nut. The result of that is I've only actually clamped the vice to the bench with 1 clamp. The other side of the vice is not clamped. So there's a definite possibility that rather than this nut coming undone, the whole vice leaps up in the air and the whole thing's a complete mess. One of those sort of disasters you see on YouTube. Let's have a look. I think it'll be okay, but you never know. I've got this on maximum stun, as it were. So the right way around. It's a normal left-handed thread. That's all locked. I'll keep my hand on it. Let's see what we got. Yeah, it's got it. Okay, so that is the nut on the end of the gearbox main shaft. I think it's called a Kickstart nut or something. And then we'll take off. This is the Kickstart ratchet assembly, which we'll take, we'll take off. We won't take off. I was going to say we'll take that off because it will come off anyway. But I think what's happened is that there's been a lot of Loctite put on this nut, together with the lock tab. Yeah, just checking the lock tab was actually doing something. I think it was, but I think they put Loctite on, because what they've done, you probably can't see, is the ears of the Loctite were on the nut, but again the actual little middle bit of the lock nut, which should fit in these splines, is almost broken off, which means that all that would happen was that this would turn with the nut, because unless the actual lock nut is anchored, there's no point tying it, you know, onto the nut, because the nut and the lock and the locking washer will turn. So that's probably why they put an awful lot of Loctite on as well. Anyway, I will see if I can persuade this to free up. I'm just trying to work out what would be the easiest way to persuade. There we go. So this is the Kickstart pole assembly. It's like the outer ratchet, and then there's the inner ratchet. Check that's okay, because I think these are unobtainable, this ratchet. And then there's a bearing inside that, and then the spring on the end, and a washer spacer, and that's it. And there, and that's it. So when we're ready, we can now remove the inner gearbox casing.